Kirby Scott Vanderwill.
Here.
Caroline Pavlovic. Here. Brian McCray.
Here.
Robert Johnson.
Here.
Sonia Del Rio.
Here.
Katanya Raby is absent. Kirby Scott Vanderwill.
Here.
Caroline Pavlovic. Here. Peter Henderson, absent. Robert Johnson. Tracy Powell, absent. So
Ryan Purnell.
no, it's a student member.
Yep. Oh, do we not call the roll for student?
I'm doing the regular roll first.
Okay.
So, Mr. Vice Chair, we do not have a quorum. We need 6 members here. We have 5.
Danielle.
Danielle?
Is present online.
Can't be present online because we can't vote her in. Her presence doesn't count for a quorum.
Okay.
Online presence.
Her online, and we actually need a quorum to actually allow her entrance into the meeting, but
Okay.
I'm going to explain what we're going to do in 4 seconds. I will also note for the record that Aiden Keefe, our student member, is here. However, he is not a voting member of the Citizens Advisory Board. The recommendation of our general counsel's office and of the board office is that we proceed with the information that is to be shared in this meeting from the Planning and Innovation team. And this would be an informational session. It would not constitute an actual meeting of the Citizens Advisory Board because of the failure of the quorum. I would also like to invite Danielle Stanley in to this informational session. And we will not be able in this session to obviously vote on minutes or take up any other business which requires a vote.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is public comment. Secretary Greenlee, are there any requests for public comment?
There were no requests for public comment.
Great. We will postpone approving the minutes. Next item on the agenda is the CAB informational session, an update on major bus and planning and innovation projects. So we're going to continue the conversation that we've engaged in the past with CTA's planning and innovation team. The bus visions project was introduced over a year ago and is moving into a new phase. They'd like to present to us the updates and gather our thoughts and feedback. Presenters today are Jason Meter. Jason, is it just the Jasons today?
I believe it's just the Jasons.
We also have Kevin Peralta. He's struggling with the printer right now to get you some hard copies of the presentation. He'll be joining us in it.
I've heard. Got it. All right. Thank you. Our presenters today are Jason Meter, Jason Wald, and Kevin Peralta from the Planning and Innovation Department. Please come up.
Share the screen real quick. You guys the full screen there. All right. Well, thanks for having us today. I met with some of you guys about a year ago to talk about the Bus Vision project. My name is Jason Meter. I'm the Senior Manager of Bus Strategic Planning here at CTA. Joined by my colleague, Jason Wald, who's a strategic planner on my team as well. And as I mentioned, Kevin Peralta will be down here. Some hard copies of what we're about to see if and when he can win the war with the printer upstairs. So basically just wanted to give you guys an update on the many bus focused projects that we're working on in the planning and innovation department that my team is involved with. I'll kind of run through and then open it up to questions, because we'll go through pretty high level on many different things. We'll have my colleagues here and also some joining online to jump in with questions on specific projects because I'm more familiar with some of these than others, on the day-to-day level. So with that, I will get started with what we're going through. So CTA's bus service is often overlooked and overshadowed by the L when people think of the CTA, but it's the most accessible, available, and agile mode of travel in Chicago, providing hundreds of thousands of rides each day, connecting Chicagoans to where they need to go. There are three key advantages compared to rail. It's more accessible in the ADA sense, as some rail stations do not have elevator access. Also provides geographic coverage throughout the city, including communities that rail does not serve. I'll show that in a couple of slides. And also is more flexible in the service delivery, if we wanted to change the routing of a bus or, extend routes, things like that, much more agile than the rail system, obviously. And hey, Kevin, thanks for joining. You got one. All right, well, we can follow up with the printed copies. Kevin, you can sit up here. We're just getting started now. So, all right. So just some quick facts on CTA buses. There's 127 routes. Recently added 20 frequent network bus routes. They're overall in our system about 11,000 bus stops, almost 2,000 buses, and 3,400 bus operators. So the service, this is what I was talking about, just showing the coverage of the bus system versus the rail system. So over 96% of Chicagoans live within half a mile of a CTA bus stop, as opposed to only 30% that close to a rail station. So, it's really what covers the city, and you can see that, illustrated on the maps on the screen. There's also nearly 5 million revenue hours of service annually. 22% of trips involve a transfer, and that's over 350 million passenger miles annually, which is longer than a round trip to Mars. So, buses are really the backbone, doing a lot of service and work and moving people in our city. Ridership, historically and currently, more people ride the bus on a daily and annual basis than the L. You can see, unsurprisingly, that in 2020, bus ridership took a drastic drop during the pandemic, and we've been on a slow but steady recovery, and still a way to go to get back to where we were, but it has been recovering faster at a higher percentage than rail as well. In 2024, 182 million total rides on bus. It's, as I mentioned, 59%, so more than the L, and an 11% increase from 2023 to 2024. We're on track to increase again for 2025, but it looks like it'll be less than 11%, but still, we're kind of just dealing with the change in patterns of people's commuting and things like that. But some of the projects that we'll get to are going to kind of hit on, how do we get people back to the bus or riding the bus for the first time, or even in light of different commuting patterns, making a mode of choice that people are taking. So we'll go over the multiple bus investments underway. They're basically in 4 different categories. Service would be like delivery of current service, looking at things like the routing, different levels of frequency, the span of service, like when it starts and ends during the day, does it go overnight? And other things, on the, softer side of service delivery. Then there's the bus priority infrastructure components. That includes redesigning streets, sidewalks, traffic signals, really to improve bus speed and reliability, and rider comfort and safety at the bus stops themselves, basically on the built environment outside of the buses. Then there's the accessibility improvements. So that's sidewalk pad improvements, different signage initiatives that we're working on, audio and live arrival signs. So Then there's also the technology enhancements. An example of that would be automated bus lane enforcement. And we'll get to that in a little more detail coming up. So I'll start with the service planning efforts to further the goals of, giving people the best service delivery within the budget that we're working with. So Bus Vision is what I talked to you guys about a year ago. That was an extensive analysis of the existing conditions of CTA's bus network, and a framing report was completed in 2023. One of the first things that came out of that was a tangible to do was implementation of the frequent bus network, which you guys may be familiar with. We've gotten 20 routes to 10 minutes or less this year. But we did a lot of preliminary outreach in 2024 just to gain understanding of, what riders prioritize, like, dislike about the service, and how we can be flexible, within, again, it could be, taking, less frequency during, peak rush hours to extend it earlier in the morning or later at night, or the service could be, maybe an owl service that goes overnight, by thinning out the midday service. So there's a lot of, trade-offs, again, within the given budget. It's not always like, if we need to add an overnight service, that's going to be a cost add. If we can thin out other areas that are less important to the riders, that we're seeing lower ridership happen. I think we're in a really good position now to have the discussions around this project now that the transit funding bill came through, because we were prepared to go out and have these discussions under the lens of, we're going to have to cut stuff. Where does it make sense to remove things from? Now we can say, oh, we have, the funding to do what we're doing and more. So, where could we really, where are the gaps that we can fill, and, how do we reallocate things to be able to best serve the communities? So we do have a next phase of the Bus Vision project that's kicked off earlier this year, but we're looking to do additional community outreach and really get those new takes based on the framing report that was done last year. We want to hear from the community more about, how we can prioritize the service investments to best suit the needs of different communities. Some of it will be focused, geographically specific. One example might be where the Red Line extension is going. How, will that, change the ridership? What bus service will still be needed, as opposed to be duplicative to the Red Line extension? But a lot of it might also be just general citywide initiatives, like, just in very preliminary talks, we've been hearing a lot about the OWL network and third shift workers, and being able to, even if it's not that frequent, even at, 15, 20-minute headways, if they could have service all night to certain, large employment centers, things like that, that could really be a huge benefit and boost to our ridership, to kind of fill a gap that's not being served right now. So that's just kind of one example of, the types of feedback we're looking for to inform our decisions going forward. So that brings us to the frequent network. This is something that's been implemented over this year. So we got 10 minutes or better service on all of the colored routes you see on the map, from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. weekdays and 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. on weekends. So a lot of these routes were high ridership and high frequency to start with, but this was about really, kind of on the fringes of those times, even if we were already hitting 10 minutes or less during those peak times. Now, those middays, weekends, and, later at night, earlier in the morning, we're getting that coverage and frequency as well. The idea is that, folks riding these routes can show up to a bus stop and expect that a bus will be there, on average 5 minutes or less, considering, you'll get there on average, between the amount of frequency. So, at that type of service, you don't really need to plan for a specific schedule. If you're transferring from one to another, you can reliably count that you won't be standing out there for, a long amount of time. So this was rolled out, during each quarter this year, along with the picks for the bus operators. And Now that there is more funding and the transit bill came through, we're looking at prioritizing additional routes for 2026 to roll into the frequent network as well. They haven't been defined yet, but there's more to come, and we do plan to beef this up even more. All right, so that brings me to bus priority infrastructure. This is, I'll say I'm partial to it. It's my favorite because a lot of my work specifically revolves around the infrastructure components of bus service delivery. So you guys may be familiar with the Better Streets for Buses framework plan. This is a plan that outlined or identified 17 corridors to focus on for bus priority initiatives. These were selected on multiple parameters. We wanted good connectivity, geographic coverage, high ridership, also connecting disadvantaged communities to employment centers and major trip generators. If you look at the blue routes on the map, you can see we're trying to get good coverage in the city and really have a grid of prioritized corridors. The Better Streets for Buses plan also identified a toolbox of treatments, is what we call it, and that's different ways that different infrastructure components that can be implemented to improve the bus service along these corridors. Now, what the plan did not do is assign specific treatments to specific locations or corridors. It's kind of like, here's where we're prioritizing, here's ways to improve buses. It's a parallel to it that's been brought up is similar to like the City of Chicago's bike network plan. It's aspirational. It's like, here's where we want to prioritize the connectivity. Here's where the network makes sense to fill out. But then from there, we need to identify specific projects to actually implement these changes. So give you a little more insight into the bus priority toolbox. Here's some of the types of things that we're looking at that can be plugged in where it makes sense along these corridors. And I will mention we do implement these types of treatments elsewhere on other bus routes as well. As there's overlapping projects with the city and otherwise, we try to put these in as much as possible. But as far as like taking a dedicated holistic approach of implementing these priority elements, we're focusing on the Better Streets for Buses network. So for bus stops, that would be accessibility improvements, relocating them, for instance, being far side of a signalized intersection is safer and on average gets to the intersection faster. And then amenities such as shelters, bicycle parking, benches, things like that. At the intersection, bus priority zones can be little bits of bus lane that will get a bus through. It could be paired with a queue jump signal that allows the bus to go ahead of a green light for regular traffic, general traffic signal improvements. And then on the streets between the intersections, bus lanes, bus boarding islands, bus stop bump outs, improved crosswalks. All bus riders are a pedestrian at the beginning and end of every trip that they take. So, pedestrian safety and having that improved access to the bus stops themselves is part of this as well. But as I mentioned, the Better Streets for Buses plan does not do is assign specific recommendations on specific corridors. So that brings us to the bus priority corridor study, which we launched earlier this year. Out of the 17 in the network, which are shown in gray, we selected 5 corridors on similar parameters that the initial 17 were selected on, very high ridership connectivity, connecting different socioeconomic neighborhoods and employment centers, and also wanted to have a couple of north-south crosstown as well as east-west streets to really fill in the gaps. There's demand and not any rail connections that were directly parallel. And this is more to provide a connection between rail stations and fill in those gaps. And the goal is to really get, study these from end to end and look for opportunities and alternatives to really get the bus moving faster and making it the most attractive option. Not only is speed a goal, but also reliability. Buses get bunched and are unreliable and have very variable service times. The number one cause of that is because they're stuck in general traffic, and the problem just compounds itself along the route. So this study, we're looking at Pulaski, Western, Cottage Grove, Fullerton, and 55th Garfield. A large component of it is going to be community outreach, or is community outreach, I should say. We started mid-November with public meetings. We've had 3 so far. We did one in Gage Park, one in Washington Park, and one in Logan Square. We had a good turnout. We've had over 100 people that we interacted with, really engaged community members. For a large part, we got a lot of support for our concepts. There were some people with concerns, as to be expected, but I think we have really good momentum. Something else I'll note is I want to make a plug for this coming Monday, December 8th. We have our 4th and final public meeting for this round of outreach on the project. This was going to be a virtual meeting. The other ones were in person. So anybody that was unable to attend the virtual or the in-person meetings for any reason, we encourage attendance. On the 8th, I can share, a link to that information with you guys. I can send it to you, Ms. Greenlee. And then, we encourage you to get the word out there. You guys attend, join, and share within your networks, because we really want to hear from as many different voices as possible, and get the information about this project out there. So then the next steps after that, we're going to take all the feedback we heard from the community, work with our consulting team to kind of dig into the data. We'll do like traffic analysis to really quantify, what kind of impacts and trade-offs we have, with each alternative concept. And then in mid-2026, we'll be able to do another round of public outreach. We'll do more public meetings and, gain feedback on our narrowed down alternatives. And then at the end of 2026, about a year from now, we hope to have a final recommendations report that will kind of piece together, what treatments we think work where. The goal would be to have as much continuous bus lane as possible along the entire extent of this route, possibly with some gaps or, lesser treatments in areas based on the traffic analysis and what we hear from the community feedback. So I'll just give you a preview just of the kind of things we're looking at. So we looked at the existing conditions and then kind of said, within a given width of a street, we're not envisioning changing the curb to curb widths, because sidewalk space is precious. And we know that in Chicago, it's built up to the right-of-way lot lines in most cases. So, rather than, acquiring property or narrowing sidewalks, we kind of took the stance of, within the space that we have, let's pretend we got rid of all of the pavement markings on the road and kind of had a blank slate. What can we fit within that same amount of space that could prioritize the bus? And you'll see it flipping through here. We looked at center running options. We looked at offset lane options, meaning you still have parking on the curb, but it takes a travel lane. We looked at curbside options, which would impact street parking, but maintain the same number of lanes of traffic. So there's different trade-offs to the different alternatives. And that's what we've been talking with the community with at these public meetings and trying to get the feedback in here, what works best, where, what is your lived experience on the street? For example, if there's, a business district that has a lot of, street parking turnover that's highly utilized and sought after, maybe the offset lane is the best approach there. If there's a more industrial area that has a lot of car traffic and gets congested a lot, maybe, but doesn't have that street parking demand, maybe we take the curbside approach and maintain the same number of lanes of through traffic so it doesn't cause delay to cars and trucks. So that's really what we're trying to dig into here. And it's not going to be that we select one option for end to end of a given corridor. It might be that, for like this 2-mile stretch, here's the option that works. Then there's an area that this option is going to be what it is. And kind of, then, this next round that we're looking forward to in the summer, we're actually going to piece together what we think fits best where, and then do the next round of feedback. All right, so that brings me to another initiative that we're currently working on called bus priority zones. So I'll note bus priority zones is a term we use both as a type of project. And then there's also a grant-funded bus priority zones initiative to implement this type of work. What it is similar as opposed to the corridor study that we're looking for end-to-end treatments and improvements. This is bus priority zones identify specific pinch points along very busy routes that we say, like the bus speeds are really slow. There's a lot of people getting on and off, a lot of people riding through this area. What can we do just at these like intersections or a couple of block areas that, are really bad just to get the buses unstuck, stop from bunching so much. So it's really just targeted efforts at smaller locations to address traffic congestion, bus stop boarding issues, intersection bottlenecks. The grant-funded implementation of this is 79th Street, Ashland, Halsted, Chicago, and Belmont are under study now. What's also different and, what will allow this to move faster in the corridor study is that the funding for this is all the way through construction. So whereas the corridor study will come up with the concept designs, and then we'll be looking for grant funding and local funds and kind of take a multi-pronged approach to constructing it. These smaller projects or smaller, in length projects that'll be scattered throughout these corridors do have funding to get built. So that's something that we hope to start breaking ground on next year. So then the next group of improvements, I'll touch on our accessibility improvements. So by nature, buses are more accessible or the most accessible part of our system because every bus has wheelchair ramps and space for wheelchairs and disabled people on the bus, as well as audio announcements. So it's kind of, the most accessible way to get around Chicago. But when it comes to the environment outside the bus, that's where there can be some challenges. In practice, bus operators where there's just, not a concrete sidewalk pad or something, can pull up past it into the intersection, but it's not an ideal situation. Currently, 87% of our bus stops already have clear accessible boarding areas. So, we're most of the way there, but, doing the math, we have over 11,000 bus stops. That still is over 1,000 that, are not accessible and don't have clear space. So we've teamed up with CDOT to install over 100 new sidewalk pads a year and bring bus stops into compliance and make them accessible. So, it's at the rate we're going, we should, have put a really good dent in it over the next few years. There's still some outlier ones that, that might be next to a railroad embankment or, have like major infrastructure work that'll need to be done. So, I can't say this initiative will be able to knock out 100% of them through it, but, the vast majority of that, 13% that still need to be improved just need, fresh, clean sidewalk and a connection to the rest of the sidewalk. So the ones that fall into that bucket, we're knocking them out at roughly 100 per year and, getting that, better and better for our riders. Also, we're rolling out tactile bus stop signs to all bus stops in the system. You may have seen these at bus stops already. I think about 40% of bus stops are done already, and they're being installed on an ongoing basis. This says bus stop in raised letters and in Braille as well. It was something that I learned in implementing this is that the visually impaired community that of blind people, only about 50% can read Braille. So that's why raised lettering is very important. I thought that was interesting because a lot of folks, that are visually impaired are elderly and happen later in life and never, learned Braille. So that was just an interesting takeaway that I never had realized before. We did get community feedback that that the community wanted the bus stop direction and route information as well, and not just the fact that there was a bus stop there. So we've, on the older signs that are already out there, working to retrofit them, as you can see in the picture, and add the route and direction in raised lettering and Braille as well to those signs. We're also working with CTA Innovation Studio, which is the Innovation Studio is an initiative to kind of fast track onboarding consultants and procuring kind of like test or pilot programs of all different sorts throughout the system. But, you know, in this particular case for accessibility and customer convenience, e-paper arrival signs, like you see in the picture, to be installed at bus stops that don't have shelters where there may be arrival signs anyway. And these are just mounted to a regular bus stop sign pole. They're solar powered. And along with this information also has a push button for audio that the next bus arrival times will be read out loud as well. So accessibility improvement all around. There's some of these, I'm not sure how many are out currently, but some of these are live out in different parts of the city as well, undergoing a pilot phase. You know, so hopefully we get good feedback on that and are able to identify funding to roll it out to more bus stops. All right, so that brings me to the next category, technology enhancements. This is one of my favorite ones, the automated bus lane enforcement, also referred to as ABLE. There are 8 city vehicles and 6 CTA buses that have cameras mounted on them. This was just rolled out in the past few months to go live. These cameras automatically take pictures of vehicles that are stopped in a bus lane or a bike lane or a bus stop, and then send a ticket in the mail. So, you know, this is for all the infrastructure improvements we're talking about and the effort we're doing and money we're spending to, you know, put in bus lanes and all of these, you know, dedicated space on the road. It's only as good as, you know, it's only going to work as well if that space is actually respected and kept open. So right now the pilot area is just downtown between North Roosevelt, Ashland, and the lake. But, you know, hopefully this gets more traction. I think there's already discussion about identifying funding for more buses to get these cameras installed. And then, you know, hopefully we can expand the boundaries of that as well so that we really get we really realize the full benefit of these bus infrastructure components we're putting in. The bus operator doesn't have to do anything. It just happens automatically and the tickets go through the mail. And I'll note that the revenue from that goes to the city. It doesn't come to CTA. So, you know, part of that, you know, is also the messaging. This isn't intended to be a money grab by CTA. This is really, you know, we want our buses to be faster and more reliable, and that's the benefit we get out of this. It does save money if buses can move faster, just because the man hours used to operate them and, you know, get them through the route are reduced by that, and then that can be reinvested in more frequent service or, you know, wherever else it is needed. Also, there's e-bus infrastructure. Right now, we have 23 active electric buses in the fleet. 3 of the 7 bus garages have charging facilities. Those are, you know, for like overnight charging, and then charging facilities at bus terminals. For the Chicago bus, we have them at Navy Pier and at Chicago and Austin. And those are kind of fast charger, you know, compared to the ones at the garages. The mast arm drops down and, you know, gives them a boost while the operator's taking their layover break at the end of each route. And that enables enough for the bus to continually go end to end on the route without running too low on charge. There is a Charging Forward initiative, which is a framework for advancing towards full electrification. And that's not tied to, you know, specific purchases or locations, but recognizes the strategy and kind of long-term vision for how to invest and roll out and sequence the transition into e-buses away from diesel. Some other bus technology things going on. You may have seen the digital signs, like the top picture. All new buses entering the fleet have these that give a lot more information about upcoming stops and transfers. There's also safety measures that are on the buses. There's active detection collision that alerts operators to obstacles such as, you know, pedestrians, bikes, things outside the bus. It's kind of like a flashing light. You know, some newer cars have that too, like in the mirrors, but this is inside the bus. So it operates the operators that way, or alerts them that way. And also you may have heard buses, caution bus approaching, you know, as it's turning. So if it detects something, not only does it alert the operator inside with lighting, but it also, gives a audible alert to the person or cyclist outside the bus as well, to try to improve safety there. There's also ongoing bus tracker enhancements. The accuracy of bus tracker arrival times has already increased enormously compared to where it was a couple of years ago. And we have a team that's still working through, looking at, the predictions versus how long it actually takes. And, that can change versus on, depending on as traffic conditions change, and external environment. And it's getting to a place where it's kind of, learning and constantly incorporating the new data that's coming into and improve the predictions. And, it's much more accurate than it was. Our operations team is also working with planning and innovation to launch a disruption management tool. What that does, more simple terms, is if there's a detour for a bus, a lot of times, or, the older system, a lot of times will not have live arrival times for the stops that are missed, and it'll just kind of, say off route or on detour. What this will be able to do is on the fly, be able to add the bus stops along the detour route and, kind of delete the ones that are off, have the alerts be live, live time, and really give the control center the ability to, put into the live system and the bus tracker what is going on when buses are off route, and we know about it. And then lastly, I'll touch on transit signal priority infrastructure. This is already live on the entire extent of Western, South Ashland, or Ashland south of from 95th to Cermak, and on portions of the Jeffrey Jump south of Jackson Park. Buses, as they approach intersections, if they're behind schedule, will automatically keep the green light green longer, or if the light is red, turn it green faster. So it's something that, again, the bus operator doesn't have to do anything. It benefits general traffic because this is different than a queue jump signal that just allows buses through. But, as the bus is coming, all the traffic gets to go through and it moves the bus faster. One interesting thing I'll note is that it's calibrated so that the bus only activates the transit signal priority request for more green if it's behind schedule. And the idea behind that is that, it's to reduce bunching. If that first bus is getting behind schedule, we're getting that one through faster through transit signal priority, where if there's one that's on time or ahead of schedule, that'll just be in the normal signal timing. So, a big goal there is just to reduce the bunching of the buses. So just to put things in context, we've made a lot of progress. We're doing a lot of hard work, but a lot of what we're doing, is in a goal to do more. Chicago lags peers in the amount of bus infrastructure. A lot of what I do every day is to, advocate for and implement bus lanes. We have to work with the city of Chicago it's their right of way, their streets, sometimes also IDOT or suburban municipalities. So we don't have full control or even any direct control over what's happening on the street and the way that it's allocated for bus priority infrastructure. So we do have good partners in the city. We work with them on a regular basis, but with a lot of competing interests, like the real leverage that we have comes with getting the public support, the political support, and the will and, to kind of educate the community on the importance of bus priority and how it, equitably connects people faster and, more reliably to different places. Then we get people out of their cars, and it's kind of like a self-reinforcing loop. If you take the lane of traffic and the bus is better, then not as many people will need to drive because the bus will be the most attractive way to get there. So we really want to, kind of really create that that reinforcement loop. And that's why we're spending so much time getting out there in the community, working with aldermen, talking to community-based organizations to, discuss the trade-offs and, be upfront about that, but really, make the case for getting this bus priority on the street and, having our partners at CDOT on board to do so. As you can see on the slide, we only have about 10 miles of dedicated bus lanes now. The corridor study I mentioned, we hope to increase that exponentially in the next few years. So there's a lot of opportunity, and that's what we're working towards. All right, I know I ran through that very quickly, and there was a lot covered there. So I'll open up to questions, comments. Yeah, kick some over to my colleagues here or online. As I mentioned earlier, I'm much more familiar with the details of some projects than others, but yeah, I would love to hear you guys' thoughts.
Sure. Thank you very much for that presentation. Very informative, a lot of substantive changes presented. It's really something to look forward to. Selfishly, I rely on the bus heavily, so this is great to see. Yeah, definitely thank you for offering to make sure we get hard copies of the presentation and then the link to the virtual town hall. That was
Yeah, absolutely.
8th, correct?
Yeah, yep, Monday at 6 p.m. Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I also really appreciated the nice little bow at the end about the relationship between CTA and the city to make sure a lot of this stuff is moved forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Material. I've got a couple questions and then I'm happy to let my colleagues chime in. Just a quick question on the presentation. The frequent network map on that slide, was that the existing routes or is that kind of like, that's where we want to end up?
That's the existing ones. So
That's great.
the last few of them going, is the winter peak start yet?
I don't know.
Starts on the 20th. Yeah, so that map will be, all of them will be implemented by December 20th. There are still a few, they were rolled out. That's the final quarter of them will be done. But yeah, all of them. Yeah, so the ones in pink start December 20th. All the other colored ones are already at frequent network levels.
That's great. And it's great to see that we'll be expanding on that. Yeah, I live on one of the routes and funny enough, what I have seen, it's been excellent, but I've sort of started to see the return of like bunching again. But if it's coming at enough of a rate and then also just going through like the leaner times, I don't think I'm going to complain about that. So yeah.
Part of it is the service delivery, making sure that, the schedules, have enough time in them to actually, do what the bus is supposed to do on the route, given the traffic conditions, things like that. We've made huge strides in hiring bus operators. That's been much less of an issue of like canceled trips altogether, like we were facing a few years ago. But the bunching, like a big part of that, like I alluded to before, is just the variability in general traffic congestion. And the most effective way to reduce that is to like put in these bus lanes and other infrastructure elements. So we're trying to tackle that from the other angle too.
And you answered my next question, the first part, but when it comes to making up these improvements in the public way, there's always this conversation with the city. Maybe I should already know this, so forgive me, but in those discussions, is CTA bringing funding to the table for these build outs? Or are you bringing all funding? Is it all city funding? There's all the different pots that can come from. But when we talk about, the bump outs and the raised intersection and the like.
So all of the above, just to give some examples. So like the city does arterial resurfacing on close to 100 miles of roadway a year. They do streetscape projects, initiatives that are, not CTA directly related at all. We work with them regularly and like advocate for including bus priority measures when they put them back. So like we get tons of bus bulbs like that. We've gotten a bunch of bus lanes on Western Avenue just recently that were part of arterial resurfacing. So that's at no cost to CTA and only at marginal cost to the CDOT project. Just doing a bump out that's big enough for a bus instead of a pedestrian, they're going to be tearing up the sidewalk and resurfacing the road anyway. Like we're just asking for peanuts on top of it. It's just where do you put the lines on the paint? Does it say bus only? Right. Stuff like that. So that's at no cost. Then there's initiatives like the bus priority zones project that has funding for the concept development, the engineering design, and the construction of them. So, then we come to CDOT and say, look, we have, X number of dollars. Here's what we want to do. Let's work together and then, be our partner when it's time to construct it. They'll manage the construction, but it's with CTA funding. For the example of the bus priority corridor study, we're looking at, much more transformative and treatments. That does not have specific construction funding lined up yet, but we're going to try to take a multi-pronged approach to that one, you know, so if there's going to be arterial resurfacing going on part of one of those routes, maybe we can knock out, you know, the pavement marking with that. Then, you know, if we need signal work to go with it, maybe we'll get some, you know, local grant funds to do the signal component of it. If we're talking about like, you know, full on BRT type stations in the middle of the road and, you know, several miles of reconstruction, we might need to like apply to like a federal grant, you know, for those larger capital costs. So in that case, it'll be like, you know, all of the above. We're going to try to do all 5 corridors with, you know, as many sources as possible. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you. And then just good transition to the bus priority corridor study. I guess maybe just level setting for myself. I noticed when you were talking about a lot of the improvements and then, you know, the community feedback and how this is a process, that the word BRT like did not come up a lot, right? And, you know, I've been around, I'm old enough to remember when, you know, gold standard BRT was like a thing we talked about for Ashland and, you know, and so I'm wondering kind of, is the end result something that's already out there, kind of like a loop link or like Chicago Avenue, or is it something beyond that we're looking at that, you know, and obviously for the network itself, perhaps it's more muscular, more beneficial, but there's also lifts involved, right?
Right. So it's to be determined, but the level of infrastructure and treatments could be up to BRT with, you know, center running lanes and full stations in the middle of the road. But then there's also some of the alternatives are more like what's on Chicago Avenue through Westtown. That would be the offset lanes, you know, maybe paired with some signal improvements and queue jumps. You know, so I think it's really going to depend on what we hear from the community feedback, what fits where, and then also the entire extent of all 5 corridors don't all have space to do something really fancy and maintain general traffic lane and street parking, you know, so some of the wider sections, you know, thinking portions of Western or like South Pulaski closer to Midway, like there's a lot of room to work with. And like, you know, we could fit in full BRT if that's what we hear that the community wants and, you know, it's feasible and we can identify funding for that. If you think about, you know, the eastern end of Fullerton through Lincoln Park, if we put in full BRT, there's not going to be room for cars left. You know, that would be the entire road. So, you know, we might have to do something more just like, you know, a bus lane and a travel lane, and that's all we can fit in there. So some of it is, yeah, just the built environment and what we're working with. So it's what we hear from the community. And, but yeah, we're setting our sights high and really, you know, are aiming for something transformative, you know, along the entire extent of all of the routes as much as possible.
Thanks. And then my last one, promise, is for Able. Was that passed as a pilot? Like, is there an expiration date on that? Is that something that needs to be renewed and is that where you revisit the kind of what are the boundaries, et cetera?
Yes, there is an expiration date. Does anybody?
It was 2 years from the first ticket issued, which I believe was
that's pretty clever.
November 20.
Yeah. Okay. Because I remember the original ordinance passed.
Yeah.
A while ago. Okay.
That was 2024.
This was issued this year, wasn't it? Last month, the first ticket?
Right, but the city vehicles were issuing tickets earlier.
Yeah.
So
it was November 2024. It was.
Oh, I see. So
the pilot extends from there.
So next year.
Yes.
Okay. I just think it'd be great if you guys came back and talked about, especially once it's on the vehicles, right? Like, what are we learning from it? I think that would be. It's come up several times in several meetings here. It's a big complaint. It's something that I think a lot of us think will have a material impact. So that time frame it's getting a little tight.
right, and our team is doing a lot of analysis, just looking at bus speed improvements, like where the violations are happening, how many tickets, like, you know, we're trying to look for a trend of like, we're seeing tons of violations, at the onset, and then, it's kind of tapering off, and then alongside that, the bus speed and reliability going up. So, we're collecting lots of data on our end and crunching the numbers, now that it is being rolled out. I don't know the specifics or like logistics of, what process is to get it extended, but, we are working with the city to get both the boundaries and the timeline extended.
And do you know, like, this is maybe PTSD from my end, but when it's on the on the buses themselves and the cameras, did you guys face any kind of like notice challenges on that?
I believe that everybody gets a warning ticket their first time,
Yes.
and then it's a fine.
Thank you.
And there was a warning period where it was only warnings, even for multiple violations. And now,
Okay.
and then I think,
This is why I'm asking.
yeah, and now that it's fully live, I believe it's still a warning on first violation and then I think the second time.
Thank you.
Unsurprisingly, it's a lot of repeat offenders, because it's, the delivery vehicles and, TNP drivers that are picking up, dropping off in the lanes. So, yeah.
Thank you.
We'll take questions from other members of the CAB or comments.
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm especially excited about seeing Fullerton as a priority corridor. It's been very annoying to get over the river just because the buses aren't reliable. They show up every 20 minutes. Even then, sometimes they get stuck. And then as you go further west, one thing I hear from a lot of people who out in like Belmont Cragen or any of the other neighborhoods out that way, there's just that huge gap between the Green Line and then the O'Hare branch of the Blue Line, so they don't have L service. So the bus is like the way that they get around. They take a bus to Logan Square. They take a bus to, they take a bus up to, if they're going towards the airport, they take a bus up north. So I'm glad that that's being proposed. Rob, I was going to ask about BRT, but your question was already answered. One other question I had was on accessibility. So with the recent snowfall, I've heard a lot of complaints from people that there are people using wheelchairs or other mobility aids that are unable to get onto buses right now because stops are not cleared out. Like people have shoveled snow into the bus stop or it just hasn't been cleared in the first place and there's ice there. With City Council not passing funding for the sidewalk clearing, is there anything that can be done on CTA's side to at least keep the bus stops clear?
I have a thought on that.
Yes, please.
I'm the old guy who can easily fall down getting on a bus because of the snow.
Yeah.
Falling is not fun. But there are possibly lots of solutions, but one that comes to my mind is neighborhood centric, probably through the individual alderman's offices, where we have, many of the aldermen have snow removal teams to shovel snow for old people. It is possible to create additional teams that just go out and shovel at least some of the major bus stop snow removal locations. As you may recall, historically, in some of the huge snows that we've had, neighbors would organize themselves and clean out their bus stops for a distance. So I don't think it's a far reach to say it's potentially adaptable to individual neighborhoods today.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I was going to say, as far as I'm aware, CTA doesn't have the resources to clear bus stops at large. We do coordinate with ward offices like SSAs a lot of times, in certain areas, they're very good about going out there and shoveling. It is under JC Decoe's contract to shovel any bus stops that have a shelter, but of course that leaves, the many bus stops that do not. So yeah, that to your point, partnering externally, I think is, the most effective term strategy that we could have to take care of that. But yeah, I'd be interested if you, have connections or, resources that we could help, facilitate that discussion, to see if there's organizations that would help with that.
Yeah, I love the bus corridor study. I live off Western Avenue. I'd love to see something close to BRT on Western. That'd be great. I just had a couple of questions related to that. I think one is prepaid boarding, something that's under consideration for some of those or all of those corridors.
Yes, so it's right now, at the stage that we are with the project, infrastructure side of things, for us, we're maybe kicking the can down the road a little bit, and seeing what alternatives actually end up. Anything that we're envisioning that would have, large bus stop boarding areas, including anything center running, would be forward compatible with prepaid boarding. It's more of a policy decision of, are we going to have validators, at multiple doors on the bus? Is it going to be on the platform? Are we going to have turnstiles, or are there going to be random spot checks, on the bus? So, all of the logistics and questions around that have not been resolved, but, we've already been in discussion saying, any station that we're envisioning to be part of these projects, that's center running, we would need to at least have space for somebody to, tap their Venture card, and, it would be forward compatible with that. So as we, if and when, fingers crossed, we're starting to build something like that, that's when we'll, get into those serious discussions about how prepaid boarding could or should look.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to see that. And then second question related to that, to the bus corridor study. One thing that, I was kind of thinking about related to the center boarding, center of the right-of-way boarding, was transfers to rail stations, and just making sure that pedestrian safety after getting off the bus, or I guess, getting off the train and walking to the center boarding station was safe. Especially on a street like Western, where you have, basically 3 travel lanes at some of those intersections. Maybe that's more of a CDOT issue, but just making sure that pedestrian safety is being considered, I guess, across the board too, not just at rail stations, with the center boarding islands or whatever.
So I think rail stations that have rail stations that have entrances on both sides of the street and a bus stop in front of both sides would kind of be the exception to the rule, where people don't have to cross in both directions. But most rail stations, the boarding is only on one side of the street anyway. And then any of the other bus stops where these would be, if you think about a round trip, whichever side you're coming from, in one direction, you don't have to cross the street. But, when you're going the other way, you have to cross the entire lane of traffic. So this way, you're just crossing half and half. And actually, it's safer to have that refuge island in the middle than to have to do, 2 half crossings is safer than 1 full length crossing. So I think all of the alternatives that we're proposing for the bus priority corridor study on every route have inherent pedestrian safety benefits on top of it, like the bus boarding islands or bus bulbs shorten the crossing distance by widening the sidewalk at the bus stops. Any of the center running ones, as I mentioned, will create a refuge island even for people not riding the bus, but even if you are, you got that halfway point. Signal improvements, any crosswalk improvements associated with these. It's really, we definitely take the pedestrian safety into account, and, it's a plus all around for any of the concepts that we're doing, except maybe like the rare exception, like I said, where the rail station has both sides, entrances on both sides that are accessible and bus stops right in front of it, but there's only a few of those around the system.
And then separately from the bus zone priority study, just kind of bus vision at large. I used to work for an alderman. We talked extensively internally about bus stop spacing. We know our wards pretty well. There's some bus stops that are like literally 1 block away from other bus stops, especially on like major routes. So routes that are not as frequent. It's a big problem that, it can sometimes take 20 minutes to get, a mile because of the frequent stops. And I understand that there's trade-offs with accessibility and things like that. But I just wonder if there's, on an individual level, it's hard politically for aldermen to say, hey, like, let's do a study on this bus stop, this bus stop, to say like, hey, like, does this need to be here? Because then if it gets taken away and people complain, they have to say, well, yeah, I thought it was a bad idea to have this here. So like a more comprehensive plan around adding / removing bus stops, I think would be a great component of Bus Vision. And I wonder if that's something that you all have looked at yet or are planning to look at in the future.
That is something we're intending to collect feedback on as part of the Bus Vision outreach. In the current situation, we shoot for between an 1/8 and 1/4 mile bus stop spacing. Now, there are many stops that are less than that in existence just because they're legacy stops. You kind of hit the nail on the head with the Alderman coordination. We out of practice need approval from the award to relocate a stop, eliminate a stop. So there's been many times where we're like, oh, these, because we have the ridership data for every bus stop, the spacing between each bus stop. And, so there's some that there's many that we've, proposed elimination of that, we just didn't get the concurrence from the wards. And something like, when we do have a concerted study, like, these, the corridor study, things like that, that kind of opens up the door to, do a more holistic ask, if you will, and kind of approach it that way. Also note for anything that would be center running, there'll be a discussion about, maybe, if we have that BRT type service, would that be, maybe half-mile spacing center running, and then there would be like an overlap with local service bus stops as well. So we're not, creating those huge gaps that making people walk a lot further. So it's something we're well aware of. If we hear from the community, at large that like, oh, 1/4 mile is the way to go, not even 1/8 mile, when we have that community feedback and voice, that would also help give us, some more leverage with the elected officials that, would ultimately need to sign off on any of these major changes. But yeah, that's absolutely part of the discussion.
Awesome.
That's great.
Yes, I agree. Then it's quite much.
Yeah. Yes.
You were speaking of potentially having centering islands in some of the streets. I must tell you personally, center boarding island on Western Avenue, I would be terrified to be standing on that boarding aisle. I would be less terrified taking a light crossing the street than I would be standing there with this traffic, primarily because cars are increasingly ignoring speed limits. And something like Western Avenue, which is oftentimes considered the inner Lakeshore Drive of the city, I'm just saying, maybe you have to be cautious and think about that.
Yeah, that is some of the feedback we've actually been hearing at the public meetings we've been having around this as well about, one of the downsides of center running is, the comfort and, perceived safety of being there. I will note that, it wouldn't just be a median, 6-inch curb. Like this would be an island that would have, shelter, probably more than a shelter, an actual, more like a loop link type island, if you will, so it's not something that, oh, there's snow on the ground and a driver won't even notice that it's there, because it's that small. This is going to be like a pretty robust structure. I mean, that being said, it's still in the middle of the road where cars speed and, drivers aren't careful and distracted. So, that is one of the trade-offs and something that, I appreciate the feedback because, you're not the first person I've heard that from.
I'm sure.
Adding a lane of bus only lane would reduce some of the space that's available for private cars. So it would maybe help reduce some of those speeds a little bit.
Right. Yeah, that's another good point. Most of these treatments that we're looking at would have traffic calming effects, narrowing between the bump out and a bus lane. And, it's just, hopefully we'll get those speeds closer to 30 miles an hour for the general traffic.
Yeah, I personally would feel safer using a center boarding if there was significant traffic calming.
Right. And in that scenario, it would be bus lanes on either side of the platform. So, assuming we have great camera enforcement and cars aren't flying down the bus lane, there'll be that distance as well.
That does not make me feel emotional.
Fair enough.
On the roads, watching people drive.
Other comments, concerns, questions?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for reminding us, and we learned this last year, but reminding us that the funds generated from the bus cameras does not go to CTA. I think there are still a number of aldermen who don't know that and see that maybe it's just a different factor in the expansion of the pilot. I know at least one downtown alderman in the pilot zone who would love to see this expanded, who would champion the effects to congestion, to road safety, and I'm sure another one would too. So I would really like to see the expansion of that pilot soon. And I'm sure y'all have the numbers for things like, you know, the city, for better or worse, is money motivated, and so if maybe CTA, we could get us off the hook for the cost of installing the cameras, which I know we're on. But if we're not getting any of the money from those cameras, then at least the city should pay for the camera installation, right? Then to say, oh, given this amount of traffic blockage in the bus lanes, if the city pays for these cameras, they can expect a return for whatever. And then extending that to the even ever increasing police overtime for saying, hey, less cops are going to be called for road blockages. They're going to have more time to investigate more dangerous crimes. I could see, was it, we're calling it ABLE? Is the automated? Okay. I could see this pilot expanding before, the expiration date. And so I really hope that that's,
and that's those really good points about like, even offsetting the police costs. Like that's a perspective I hadn't even thought of yet, but that definitely helps make the case for funding the expansion.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so I wanted to ask more specifically about the funding sources from CDOT for some of these bus infrastructure projects. Are there specific teams at CDOT that we work more closely with than others?
Yes, there's a complete streets team that we work with most frequently. And that's who's kind of our partner with the bus priority zones and the bus priority corridor study. So like when we come, with projects, that's who we work with directly, and it's most aligned with what we're doing. But then we work with other teams at CDOT when we're piggybacking on their projects and interjecting ourselves, for if you will. And so that's inclusive of the streetscapes team, which is different. That's for like they do a lot of pedestrian improvements and reconstruction with more landscaping, things like that. But there's lots of room to incorporate bus priority. And then the arterial resurfacing, which covers the most mileage, even though the opportunity isn't as great because the scope of the projects are more limited. And that's a separate team as well in the engineering department that we work with regularly. We're also regularly coordinating with like their planning and policy side of CDOT, and just trying to put that on every level to really, get our work our agenda to improve buses, into their programming and plan.
Okay. So how, maybe this might be some information for the board. Actually, I don't know how closely y'all are keeping up with city council budget negotiations, but there's some new publicly available information from OBM about decreased bonding money for CDOT. And it depends drastically on the team. Like for CDOT's lighting infrastructure, that's increasing, while other teams, like I believe Complete Streets, their bonded funds are going to decrease significantly. And so I'm wondering if there's maybe some kind of priority list for the bus vision ideas that the community has been supporting that might be at risk if, say, the Complete Streets funding decreased by 50%.
I think it would definitely be more challenging for us to, like, as I mentioned before, when we work on those types of projects with CDOT, it's at no cost to CTA for the most part. And if there's less of them happening, then we have less opportunity to incorporate the bus priority infrastructure. So, I think it would be, a detriment to the overall goal of, getting as much in as possible, as quickly as possible, if there were less overall funding for Complete Streets initiatives.
Okay, yeah. Is it possible that the already acquired federal funding for BPZ could be at risk if CDOT is unable to support their side with CTA?
No, that's a separate grant funded pool of money. So, I guess the only risk would be is if, it might be that, things that money was targeted for would be like, oh, that'll get covered by that streetscape project. Oh, that'll get covered by that Complete Streets project. So we can kind of like then do one more thing with our pot, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, if we can like check some of the things off the list that they're paying for outside of that, you know, that we won't be able to now, we'll have to spend the infrastructure money directly on what we intended to in the first place. But there has been efficiencies over the years where like on Western, we were planning to do, you know, a mile of bus lane, and they're like, oh, half a mile of that will get covered by AR. So now we only are paying for half a mile. We can do half a mile somewhere else. So it's more like those opportunistic things that may go away and not free up money, but the funds themselves are not going to go anywhere, and we'll still be able to construct as much as we would anyway, as far as the bus priority.
Yeah, perfect. No, I love hearing the efficiencies that CTA and CDOT achieve together. So I think these funding cuts feel just super undeserved, right at the harm of road safety, at the harm of transit efficiency. So thank you.
I just have one, I'll make it easy.
All right.
December 8th, the virtual meeting. Can you post that on the CTA Instagram channel? Like, you guys post those community meetings? Oh, and I can repost it.
And
We have a lot of great content to share on social media. I don't know if you guys leverage the channel, but I saw Chance the Rapper the other day on here. So I said,
Yeah, we've had a few social media like Instagram story style posts for these meetings. And we've worked with CDOT's outreach office as well to get some of the notices out.
gotcha.
And I believe we'll be posting a recording of the meeting on our website afterwards. So
yeah, we've also sent social media graphics to ward offices and community-based organizations and asked them to post it as well, just to get the word out there. So I don't know how many actually have. I know at least a couple of aldermen have put them up.
Gotcha. I'd be happy to repost if we get the graphics.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I'll send the graphics and the information about the upcoming meeting right after this.
Thank you. That's all.
I think that concludes comments and discussion.
Thank you again for your time. Thank you for asking or answering questions. And
Yeah, thanks. And
appreciate you.
I love talking, and I'm definitely a bus and transit nerd. So if you have further questions talk about this some more, like anytime. Yeah. I appreciate you guys' support and interest as well.
Holidays.
Yeah. Happy holidays.
yeah, you as well. Thank you.
So